Well, I'm excited to be joined today by Dan Gingiss. He is a customer experience keynote speaker. He's going to be telling us a bit about the work that he does and the people that he helps. But without further ado, Dan, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Dean. I am super excited. This is the first show I think that I have been on that I would call local, like somebody that lives where I live and that serves people right in our community. So I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of fun today learning about the work that you do, the people that you help, and some of your own journey that you've had getting to where you're at with your time on the stage. So kick us off here. So, we hear about the term um, customer experience. It's become a very prominent concept in a lot of corporations the last 10 years. Maybe shape up for us, what does, in your mind, customer experience mean, and how do you approach helping your clients around customer experience?
Sure. So I define customer experience as how your customers feel during every single interaction with your brand. And the two pieces there are the feeling part, because perception is reality. If I feel that it is difficult to work with you or inconvenient or what have you, that's the reality, even if you think you're providing a very simple and convenient experience. And then every single interaction matters, and that's really important. Is that we have, if you think about the brands you do business with, you have multiple interactions with them across multiple channels and multiple time periods, and it all adds up to a perception of the brand. And so the way that I approach customer experience is not as this multi-year, multi-million dollar transformational project that every company needs to do, but more as a series of little things. And it's an endless series. You have to enjoy the journey because there really is no destination. There's no company that I know of yet that has a perfect customer experience. But if we look at it as a series of little things, it's far more approachable to people, and anyone can do it. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be difficult or require a lot of technology. It just becomes about creating this culture where everything we do is in service of our customer.
It's really, really interesting to think about the perception that we're creating with each of those interactions. Tell me a little bit about who you are working with mostly. What's the audience you're speaking to? What are the platforms? I know you're on the road and in the air quite a bit throughout the year, but shape up for us the type of groups that you're aimed at working with.
Sure. So I tend to focus on mid to large size companies and their related associations. And that can be franchise organizations because they've got obviously lots of small business owners that are doing the same thing, and franchises tend to be very consumer focused. It also can be individual companies that have consumers as their customers. And then certainly, we all know as speakers that associations are wonderful places to speak, in particular because there's so many different organizations represented in the same room. I'd like to say that I service anyone that has customers, but that's a little too broad. But I can tell you that if you have customers, or you call them clients or patients or guests or whatever you call them, that the content that I share will be useful to you.
Interesting. So, we might have a variety of people watching our conversation, which, they could be small business owners, they could be consultants, trainers, speakers. And so anybody that's in business has some sort of client that is going to have some sort of experience. And I'd be curious for you to maybe distill down two or three principles that any of us, even if we're a business of one or a business of five, can be thinking about when it comes to principles to build our customer, our client experience on.
Sure. So I think as speakers or consultants, coaches, however you define your business, uh, we have really two sets of customers. This is how I look at it. You have the client that has hired us, and that could be an event professional, it could be a CEO, it could be any number of people, head of marketing, what have you. And then we have the audience, and the audience may be their employees or their association members or their franchisees, but that tends to be a different group than the client that's hiring. And I make sure, the way that I like to say it is, my topic is customer experience. I teach how to create remarkable experiences. Remarkable means worthy of remark, worthy of talking about to others. So I look at my job as to create a remarkable experience for my client and my audience while I am teaching the audience to do the same for their customers. So what exactly does that look like? From a client perspective, my girlfriend knows that even if we're out on a date on Saturday night at 10 p.m., I'm checking my email because one time I got an email from a bureau at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night, and I responded within 10 minutes and I got the gig, right? So it's about being fast and being responsive. One of the core tenets of what I teach is about being responsive. So I feel like I have to be responsive. Otherwise, I'm not practicing what I preach. Some speakers like to make limits on the number of pre-event calls that they have. I tell clients, I'll talk with you as many times as you want because I want you to be comfortable and happy and prepared for this event. And I'm going to come and deliver a great talk for you, and I'm going to inspire your audience and what have you. But if you have questions, if you have concerns, I want to iron those out ahead of time. So I'm not going to limit you on the number of calls. I try to do things like that. I will tell clients that what they're really buying is not a speech. They're buying me for the entire day. And so I say, look, I'll be at your event. Do you need help with something else? Would you like me to moderate a panel? Would you like me to do some video interviews with your executives that maybe you can use for social media? Would you like me to attend a VIP lunch? I'm here for you for the whole day. I'm not going to land and do a speech and then immediately go back to the airport. So I try to integrate things that feel like a great client experience again while I'm teaching that. On stage, it's about creating an experience for the audience that they remember and want to tell other people about. So yeah, I want them at the end. This is not ego talking. This is me
Mhm.
doing what I feel like my expertise is. I want people saying, Dan was the best speaker at the whole event, or the thing I remember about this event was that keynote that Dan did. And that means that I have created the kind of experience that I'm teaching them how to create. So I integrate things into the talk also that are very intentionally memorable. You've heard of the term a signature bit, but this idea of you get to a point where the points at which the audience is going to laugh, when they're going to cry, when they're going to clap, and these are intentionally created so that it ends and they feel like not just that they listened to a talk, but that they had an experience. And that's that's a difference, but I really strive for that because again, it's what I'm teaching. So I hope that answers your question, but that's how I look at it.
Yeah, and as you were explaining that, I was thinking about how there's some decisions that you've made. It seems like that. So if we look at your business, you've decided these are things that I'm going to do. So the responsiveness, for example, how are you going to live that out? You're going to respond to emails quickly. That's a decision you made, and then that turns into a promise that you can give to your customer or your future customer, and so that they know what to expect, and it's opportunity to build trust. So it seems to me like while the experience people have is an outcome, we don't want it to be accidental. Is that a fair thing for us in our business to be really intentional about it?
Very much so, intentional and on brand. So my brand is about experience. My brand is the experience maker. So I would expect if I were a customer of mine that it would be an experience to work with me. Now your brand is something else, right? But being consistent, intentional, and on brand all of the time, I think is really, really critical. And what does on brand look like? I mean, you could go to somebody like Jesse Cole of the Savannah Bananas, right? Where the guy's always in a yellow tuxedo. No matter where you
Mhm.
see him, he is wearing his brand 100% of the time. I love that about him. That may not be us, and that may not be what we do to represent our brand, but I do think it's important. There's so many speakers out there that if we've taken the time to build a brand, we do have to live it. And it just so happens that my brand's about experience. Other people's brands are about leadership or marketing or something else. And I would expect if you're a marketing expert on stage, I'd expect that your marketing's pretty darn good. I would expect that you live those same values in your company. Or if you talk about leadership, that you exhibit that in how you talk to people. And so you can adapt this depending on what your topic is. But I think that's really critical. And the intentionality part, it's a good way to put it.
So let's shift gears a little bit. I'm curious. Give us a flavor of some of the journey that you've been on to the stage. Each of us have an interesting backstory that informs where we've gotten, and I think it'd be helpful to anybody watching, whether they're a potential event planner or maybe a speaker themselves that are on their own journey, to hear a little bit about your story.
Sure, I did sort of fall into it in a similar way that I fell into customer experience. So I spent most of my career in corporate America, and I was a marketer. I grew up in direct mail. I expanded into digital channels and learned email and web marketing and social media and all that. And there was a role that came available at Discover Card where I worked for almost a decade. And one of the things about Discover is that they really encourage people to move around a lot. So in 10 years, I had 5 different roles there, and that was very typical. And this last role that I was in, I was recruited by the chief digital officer, and the title was the head of digital customer experience. And I said, all right, this sounds really interesting. But I went to the guy and I said, why are you recruiting me for this role? I've never done customer experience in my life. And he said something to me that changed my career. He said, I've been watching you in business meetings, and you are a guy that is always wearing the customer hat. You are always trying to solve business problems through the lens of the customer. I said, wow, I'm not sure that I could have said that about myself, but now that you've said it, yeah, you're right. That is how I think. So I got into the role, fell in love with customer experience, and that's a story for a different podcast. But then we had this HR thing where we had to develop these personal development plans or whatever they were, PDPs. And I will admit, I kind of would roll my eyes at these kind of things. So I went into his office and I'm like, what do I put for this? And he said, Gingiss, your personal development plan is simple. I said, awesome. Tell me what it is. And I got out my notes. He goes, I want you to become a recognized expert in digital customer experience. I said, okay, what does that look like? And he said, I want you to get out there and be at conferences and speak on panels and tell everybody about all the cool stuff that we're doing at Discover. I'm like, okay, I think I can do that. And that was literally, he put the idea in my head. And I joke with him now how much he created a monster and he didn't even know he was doing it. So I remember begging my way onto my first panel. And it wasn't that hard because as a corporate speaker, when you're coming in with a logo on your business card and you're not charging anything, it's not that hard to get on stage, right? So I more or less begged and got my way onto a panel. And then I found that I was being asked to be on panels, which was cool. And eventually I got up the nerve to beg to do a solo presentation. And eventually I was asked to do solo presentations. And so what was cool is that by the time I went off on my own, which was 5 years ago, I had already been speaking for 5 to 7 years
Mhm.
as a corporate speaker. Wasn't making money off of it, but I was getting the reps in. I was getting comfortable with it. I knew I was pretty good at it just based by audience reaction. Like one of the things that kept happening in audiences that shocked me is people would come up to me and they'd say, you know, I never in my life thought of applying for a Discover card, but now that I heard you talk about it, I'm going home and applying for one. That actually wasn't my goal, but I was stunned that that was the reaction people were getting. So I kind of knew I was doing something right. And then it was easier for me to go off on my own because I didn't have to start as a beginner. I knew I could, whether it was pricing or whatever, I knew that I already had enough reps under my belt that I wasn't brand new at it. And that gave me the confidence to then go do it as a profession.
That's a great story, and it really speaks to the power of people around us and how everything that we're doing has some connection to the people that we connect with, and how, you know, it had a big impact on you what he said to you, but that same thing that we have the opportunity to have an impact on others. And so if you're speaking to somebody that's maybe dabbling or pondering becoming more of a speaker, maybe they're a consultant right now or an expert who occasionally speaks, or maybe they're in the corporate world, what are some of the tips or ideas that you would pass along to them as they're exploring that? Because this is not a thing that's right for everybody, but
Yeah,
for the
totally.
people that it's right for, it's like the ultimately right thing for them. What are some of the things that you'd share with others?
I mean, one of the things I've always done in business, in corporate America, and in my own business is lead with passion. Because when I'm passionate about something, it comes out of my pores and people see it and receive it. And in fact, today, one of the best pieces of feedback that I get from audience members is they come up to me and they say, "You must really love what you do." And I'm like, yes, thank you for noticing that. That I am trying to project that on you. I'm trying to, I mean, I have fun when I'm on stage. It's fun for me. It doesn't feel like work. It is fun. And then the audience is having fun with me. So if you're not passionate about it, it's hard to do it well. And you can be passionate about the topic and maybe you get good at the speaking part. That's okay. Or you can be passionate about the performance aspect and really enjoy that part of it. But I think passion is super important. And then I always tell people it's about getting the reps in. It's not about memorizing a speech. It's about doing it enough times that it becomes second nature. So that when you tell me a story, it could be the thousandth time that you've told the story, but it feels like you're telling it right to me, like we're having drinks at a bar. And that to me is where audience members can connect with speakers and speakers can connect back with the audience, because ultimately that's what an audience is looking for. It's just like that's what a customer is looking for. They're looking for a connection with a brand. They're looking for today's consumer is looking for a relationship with a brand, not just a transaction. And I think audience members are similar, right? Is that they're not looking for just another keynote speech. Most of them have seen tons of keynote speeches, and a lot of them have expectations about what a keynote speech looks like and feels like. But what they're looking for is connection. And so these are kind of the things that I focus on. And the repetition part just becomes more natural. So I could tell the same story 1,000 times, and I'm not going to use the exact same words probably in any of those 1,000 times. It's the same story with the same moral at the end and the same characters, but it's not the exact same words. And I think it does take practice to get comfortable with stuff like that. And I remember I was just working recently with a brand new speaker who was trying to memorize their talk and failing because memorization is really
Mm-hmm.
hard,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't have a brain for it, and I do not, like, my son can listen to a song once and know all the lyrics. I'll get the tune down immediately, but I will not know any of the lyrics because memorizing lyrics for me is impossible. I can't memorize a speech either. So this person was having trouble memorizing, and I said, just pretend we're at a bar and just tell me the story that you just tried to tell in your speech. Just like it's a story, it was a story about her own background, right? So I knew, I mean, it's her story. And when she just told it to me as a person, it flowed out perfectly. And I said, if you missed a detail there, I don't know, because that wasn't my story, right? It was a great story. I was entertained, I was educated, and you just told it beautifully. And that's the difference between repetition and telling a story that you know in your heart because it happened to you or because you've told it so many times, and trying to memorize. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the real difference between speakers and storytelling that works and is authentic versus stuff that feels sort of overly scripted and over prepared.
Yeah. It's a really important point, right? Have the story known instead of remembered. And when it's such a part of who you are, then it's easy to come out in a natural way. So great tips, inspiring journey. And I'd be curious if somebody wants to be in touch with you or follow along in some of the insights that you have around customer experience. Where should they go? How should they reach you, Dan?
Well, thanks for asking. Best way is to come straight to my website, dangingiss.com. I do a weekly newsletter with customer experience tips and all that if you're interested in that. But I'm also very responsive, so feel free to reach out to me on the website or connect on LinkedIn, and I will be happy to respond to you very quickly because I pride myself in that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dan, for sharing your story and the tips that you have for us today. And I look forward to learning more soon.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Take care.